that question of what is the Atma, I have explained to you in principle that it is spiritual, not material, that it is eternal. I've given you a couple of verses from the Bhagavad Gita that start to present its mystique. But one of the concepts that is very popularized or often is brought up is the Atma equal to God, or is it different from God, the Supreme, Brahman, Bhagavan, however you wish to address it at this stage? And the best, let's say, verse from the Gita to address this particular topic is chapter 15, verse 7. In chapter 15, verse 7, Krishna says that it is an eternal portion of me, speaking about himself, that becomes the jiva in the world of living creatures. So this is the first half of the verse. It is an eternal portion of me that becomes the jiva in the world of living creatures. So there he says that, first of all, the jiva is a part of Krishna, or a part of Bhagavan, God. First, very, very, very important statement. Second, it is an eternal portion of him. Naturally, if it is a portion of an eternal being, then that portion will also be eternal. Okay? Second, that portion is, by definition, a portion, not the entirety. He says it is an eternal portion of it. And the Sanskrit is amsho or amsha. Amsha means portion, not entirety. So he says a part of me becomes the jiva, not the whole of me, or I myself become the jiva. And so from that opening half, we can conclude one thing, and that is that the soul is not equal to God. Although we can also conclude that the soul comes from God and will therefore share nature with God, as we will see in the coming slides. Now, the second half of that verse says the following, that the jiva enters this world of living creatures to cultivate the subjective powers of prakriti, mind, and the five senses. That means the following, that this spiritual entity known as the jiva enters into the material world to cultivate or to use the powers of material nature, mind, and the senses. Meaning that these things, the world, our body, the senses, the mind, are nothing but tools, platforms, objects to be used for the aims of the jiva and the Lord. Now, there we've had the mind referred to twice now already. In the previous verses that I have read to you, Krishna says that the mind has not understood the soul in its reality. Here, Krishna says that the jiva comes to use the mind for its purposes. What this clearly shows us is that there is a very clear and distinct separation between the soul and the mind, and that the mind is actually part of material nature, prakriti, whereas the soul remains part of spiritual nature, purusha. Okay? The reason I make this very, very clear, and I'm going to make even clearer, I'll dedicate an entire section of today's lecture to explaining the mind to you, is because often I have seen traditions, cultures, devotees, seekers of all kinds equate our cognitive abilities, our consciousness in its current form to our soul, that our mind, our knowledge that we acquire in the mind, the decisions we make, etc., are actually one and the same as our soul. Okay? So this has to be clearly corrected, that this is not the case, at least not in the teachings of Paramahamsa Vishwananda. Okay? So, as I said, if that is the case, that the mind and soul are not the same, then the next question is, well, what is the mind? Now, you may feel like this is not actually relevant to the Atma topic, but it is. And it is because it helps to show why we do not see our own souls and why we don't identify with them or perceive them at our current situation. Okay? So, I'm going to, for the next, I don't know how many minutes, break down the mind for you in all its details so that you can walk away from today's lecture really having grasped what is my mind? What is it made up of? What are the processes that go on in there? And how can I therefore understand the exact work that has to be done on that mind so that I can attain or reach the realization of my soul, which exists transcending matter, therefore transcending that mind. Okay? Now, the mind is comprised of 4 parts. First statement. Part number 1 is called Manas. Manas is our sensory processing mind. It is our outward-facing faculty. What do I mean by that? It means that it is the portion of our mind that is responsible for sending signals through our senses out into the external world and processing incoming signals from our senses from the external world. Okay? Now, the second part of the mind is called chitta. Chitta is our storage of our many, many impressions, desires, experiences. Now, it is often described as a sort of lake, a still lake, that when it gets disturbed, a wave may come from it, or a disturbance in the surface that throws out one particular desire, one particular thought or reaction. So let me describe to you the process of what essentially is happening. An external event takes place. My senses interact with this or receive this information, this cognition. This enters my mind, the manas element of it. And the manas then stores this experience or impression in this section called chitta. However, it doesn't end there. It is not that we simply receive and store. The chitta will also present a response to that particular sensory information. For example, if my senses perceive fire, it arrives at my chitta, and my chitta will bring up previous experiences and impressions of fire, desires that I may have, or reactions and responses that I may have to fire. Okay? It's just so that we understand the two-way nature of chitta. It is both for storing and it presents reactions, so to speak, to the freshly received information, the data. Okay? Now, I'll come back to chitta, but part number 3 is called ahhankara, and is very important. Ahhankara means ego, or this sense of I, or individuality, independence. Okay? This ahhankara, it stains the decision-making processes of the mind. Okay? Keep that statement in mind for now, that the ahhankara corrupts or stains the decision-making processes of the human mind. It's going to make more sense when we understand the fourth option, or the fourth section of the mind. The fourth section is called buddhi. Buddhi literally translates as intellect, but it is the discriminatory faculty of our mind. It is the clear, neutral aspect of our mind that is able to make the right decisions. It can discriminate between what is right and what is wrong. It can discern between what should be done and what should not be done. And it does so when it is operating in optimal conditions without any pollutions or filters placed before it. Okay? So, the 4 parts are manas, chitta, ahhankara, and buddhi. Now, of these 4, one is by nature problematic, and that is ahhankara, because essentially it pollutes the decision-making faculties and processes of the mind to ensure that whatever decisions we make based on the informations that we receive are only beneficial, first and foremost, to that ahhankara. So, for example, I will go through step by step the process that a mind goes through. Something external happens. My senses perceive this, and this information enters through the manas. It then goes to the buddhi, and the buddhi makes the first decision of what should be done as a response. And it does so from a place of knowledge, of neutrality, of discernment. This is what people sometimes call the intuition. It is the first voice that comes. But before this comes back out into actual action, so to speak, or response, this signal from the buddhi is sent to the chitta, meaning that this information that was received, this conclusion, is stored in our storage bank called chitta. But before it comes back out as a reaction, it also passes through the filter called ahamkara. And the ahamkara clouds this decision in the sense of, how will this benefit me and me and me first? Then we can start to think about other people. So with the example of fire. Fire happens. My buddhi says that everyone must be made safe. Okay? This is the correct response to fire. Perhaps it says remove other flammable objects, etc. All kinds of good responses. This response is stored in my memory. And then before it goes out, my ahamkar kicks in and says, what will this mean for me? What does this fire mean for me personally? And so what happens is that the ahamkar essentially says, save yourself, as a very basic example. So what before was save everything or everyone, ensure the safety of everything and everyone, now is save yourself first. And if you then are safe and everything is guaranteed, you may then potentially look at saving other people. The ahamkar may now allow, let's say, other things to pass through its filter. But the ahamkar takes the rational, good, neutral decision and always makes it about you. What do you gain from it? What do you not gain from it? For example, when somebody says, can you please help me? Your buddhi may say, yes, I have the skills and the ability to help this person, therefore I should give the help. This is stored in the impressions. However, the ego says, at what cost to myself? And at what gain to myself? Do I have the time? Do I have the energy? Will I get some reward from it? This is the nature of ahamkara. This individuality, this independence. It is the cause of this type of behavior, this identification so strongly with ego and I and me and mine. And so our decision-making faculties are often very faulty because of this filter. Therefore, what are we trying to achieve here? How does this relate back to the topic of today, which is the Atma? It's simple. What we need to do is uncloud this buddhi, remove this filter called ahamkara, which is making this problematic scenario take place. Now, our chitta, our storage bank, may have many bad habits and previously unhelpful actions stored in there. And from time to time, it may suggest them as responses to external factors. Okay? Like somebody insults you. If you've ever witnessed or yourself engaged in some physical violence in response to these situations, your chitta may say, do it again. But if the buddhi is unclouded, the buddhi will resolve that that is not the best course of action, and so it is irrelevant whether that chitta is, in that sense, negatively influenced or not, because the buddhi will still make the right decision. The problem is that most times, most people are not operating from an unclouded buddhi. Rather, we let our decision processes always go through that ahamkara filter, ego. What is spiritual sadhana then? Spiritual practice. It is to subdue the ego, change the habits of chitta to help avoid strengthening the ego again. So two different things. One, it is to subdue the ego. And two, it is to improve the habits and responses of our chitta, our storage, by developing helpful habits and habits that are in accordance with our current goals. Okay? So essentially, this is how we uncloud or unblock the mind so that the buddhi can be accessed. But there's one question that remains. Why does the buddhi make good decisions? What is the faculty that allows the buddhi to be knowledgeable, knowing, and make right decisions? And this is where the link to the soul comes. The buddhi is the only faculty of these four parts of the mind that has the capacity to turn inward. And it acts therefore as a portal or a sort of gateway to go beyond the mind. The buddhi, once it is unclouded, can introspect or introvert itself in a sense and look to what is within. And what is within is the Atma. And the Atma possesses something called consciousness. And that is part of its integral nature. It has knowledge, it is conscious. And that knowledge is what shines through, and that knowledge is what allows us to make informed decisions, right decisions, righteous decisions, dharmic decisions. Okay? So this is, in a sense, the only link and relationship between the mind and the soul. The mind is a lesser thing, it is a material thing, and it is a problematic thing for the various reasons that I explained earlier, chief among them being the ahamkara, which pollutes all the otherwise good information that we have within our minds, okay? The sensory information that we receive and the choices that we make in response to them, polluted by ahamkara. If we overcome and subdue this ahamkara, then the buddhi ensures that the chitta is not a problem for our life. Our previous experiences and habits won't be a problem moving forward. They are a problem if ahamkara is still the boss of the decision-making process. Okay? So these are the essential dynamics of the mind in Hinduism. 4 elements, each working with each other, often suboptimally, so that we can have the experiences that we do. We, as spiritual seekers, are there to fine-tune that so that we can introvert that mind towards its higher authority, in this case, today's subject matter, the Atma. Okay? So,